Hello and welcome to our presentation on critical theory. My name is Delaney Yarbrough and I'm partnered with Reagan Hollomon to be giving this presentation.
Our objectives for this presentation are to define critical theory, understand the historical influences on its development, name the key contributors, identify its major assumptions, understand what questions critical theory can be used to investigate, determine its methodologies, and explore critical theory in use. So what is critical theory? Well, it focuses on the emancipation of individuals from hegemonic power. It aims to find practical solutions to social problems, and it seeks to address the political, social, and economic issues which lead to the social oppression, conflict, struggle, and power structures. When looking at these ways of defining critical theory, one can see that it's closely intertwined with social justice efforts. It looks at power structures in a critical way and seeks to find solutions to the social problems resulting from them. This is why you will also see critical theory called transformative paradigm. Moving on to historical background, critical theory was coined by Max Horkheimer in 1937, who was the head of the Frankfurt Institute in 1930 that aimed to expand Marxist studies. His original vision for critical theory combined many disciplines in social scientists to study modernity. It brought together sociologist theorists like Marx and Weber, the philosophy of Hegel and Kant, the psychoanalysis of Freud, and then later the analysis of aesthetics and culture. As World War II ensued, Frankfurt scholars became skeptical of the Marxist understanding of revolution as a response to capitalism, and they started to reevaluate the role of revolution. Adorno shifted its focus towards the use of pop culture and misinformation to shape public perceptions and the power of hegemonic control via distracting individuals from abuses of civil rights. The critical nature and approach to critical theory was heavily influenced by the Holocaust. The Frankfurt School itself was relocated many times to avoid persecution from Nazis. Members of the school witnessed horrible acts of civil rights and human rights violations. Next, we're going to briefly look at 4 key figures of critical theory. First, Max Horkheimer contributed to critical theory vastly with his publications of Eclipse of Reason and Dialectic of Enlightenment. He explains the detrimental nature of technocratic rationality found in capitalism to calculate a best possible option within a reliable structure. He argues that a better use of reason is needed to overcome hegemonic power and maximize autonomy. In all, he really argues that reason is a tool for liberation. In contrast, Adorno believed that reason and reality were irreconcilable and that the flaws of society could therefore never be fully alleviated. So where Horkheimer's critical theory worked to overcome injustice, Adorno's concerned the nature of philosophy and the comprehension of social problems. Marcuse's contribution to critical theory was most notably his integration of Freudian psychoanalysis with resistance to revisionist readings of Freud's work. He thought that previous critical theorists' views of individuals as easily manipulated by culture was too simplistic. Humans are complex beings constantly resisting social pressures. Marcuse noted that critical theory was in need of analyzing the inner workings of individuals. He also proposed that repression develops through consumer culture. Habermas is considered a leading member of the second generation of critical theorists. The differences between his work and the work of his predecessors is a shift referred to as the linguistic turn in critical theory. He asserts that truth occurs within language and that it can be realized through a process of discussion and debate. He believes that humans are capable of reaching consensus and that this is as close to the truth as we can expect. Thus, critical scholarship is necessary for liberation and the advancement of knowledge because something is true until it can be replaced by a superior explanation.
Paulo Freire is a key figure in critical theory, especially in education. His book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, redefined education as a tool for liberation rather than oppression. He criticized the banking model of education where teachers deposit knowledge into passive students, reinforcing power structures. Instead, he advocated for problem-posing education where students and teachers engage in dialogue and co-create knowledge. At the core of Freire's philosophy is conscientization, becoming aware of social injustices and taking action. He saw education as a means for challenging oppression and fostering change. His ideas continue to shape critical pedagogy, inspiring educators and activists to fight systemic inequalities and empower marginalized voices.
When looking at critical theory's major assumptions, there's a clear theme of egalitarianism across critical theory. but this equality stems from a person's ability to exercise meaningful autonomy rather than a resolution of inequality through authoritative social regulations. Conflict is both unavoidable and necessary in the eyes of critical theory. Social change stems out of conflict rather than comfort. Critical idealism and critical realism are both found in critical theory. Simply put, this is either like the optimism or cynicism that results from viewing the world through a critical lens. For example, Horkheimer, who we discussed, he's a critical idealist because he saw reason as a tool for liberation, and it can be achieved. Adorno, on the other hand, he's a critical realist who did not think injustice could be completely overcome, but he sought to comprehend social problems. Knowledge is defined as neither concretely subjective or objective in critical theory. Rather, it is a culturally defined social construction.
Critical theory is not just about analyzing society. It's about challenging the structures that create inequality and imagining new possibilities. When we investigate using critical theory, we focus on how power operates in institutions, how social struggles unfold, and how individuals resist or adapt to oppression. Now, this approach encourages researchers to go beyond surface-level observations. Instead of just describing a system, critical theory asks, who holds power? How do social institutions maintain control? And how do individuals push back? One of the core aspects of investigating with critical theory is looking at domination, alienation, and resistance. Researchers study how people experience oppression, how they navigate systems that disadvantage them, and how they organize for change. This perspective also emphasizes praxis, meaning that research should not just interpret the world, but actively seek to transform it.
In terms of philosophical foundations, critical theory has a transactional epistemology, an ontology of historical realism, dialogic methodology, an axiology that respects cultural norms.
Critical theory research relies primarily on qualitative methods because it aims to explore the lived experiences of individuals within systems of power. Instead of relying on numbers or statistics alone, these methods allow for deep, contextual understandings of oppression, resistance, and transformation. Some of the qualitative methodologies that are used are listed here. One key methodology within critical theory is critical ethnography. Traditional ethnography focuses on cultural observations, but critical ethnography challenges power structures and seeks to expose systems of oppression. This method doesn't just document social realities, it actively encourages change by engaging with participants in ways that empower them. For example, researchers might work alongside communities to address issues of racial or economic inequality rather than merely studying them from an outsider's perspective. One seminal study that applied critical theory to education is Paul Willis's 1977 ethnographic study, Learning to Labor. In this study, he asked why do working-class boys, despite education being promoted as a way to move up in society, often remain in working-class jobs. Using critical ethnography, he spent time in British secondary schools observing and interviewing a group of working-class boys he called the lads. These students rejected school discipline, mocked teachers, and engaged in anti-school behaviors, which they saw as a way to resist authority and to assert their independence. Instead of valuing education as a means of social mobility, they viewed it as a middle-class institution that wasn't designed for them. However, Willis found something ironic. Even though the lads resisted school, this very resistance actually prepared them for working-class jobs. Their anti-authority attitudes and preference for hands-on, informal learning made them well-suited for manual labor and factory work, exactly the types of jobs their families had. In other words, their rebellion didn't disrupt their system, it actually helped reproduce it. And from a critical theory perspective, this study exposes how education maintains class structures rather than breaking them. Instead of being a tool for empowerment, schools can function as institutions that reinforce existing inequalities. It also highlights how cultural resistance, while powerful, doesn't always lead to systemic change. Sometimes it just keeps the cycle going. Willis's work is a prime example of how critical theory can be applied to real-world education settings. This demonstrates that issues of class, power, and resistance are deeply embedded in schooling systems. Critical theory, it challenges us to question power structures in education and society, and it pushes us to examine who holds power and whose voices are marginalized. A key idea is that education is never neutral. It either reinforces inequalities or it challenges them. Oppression and resistance, they interact in complex ways, and critical theory helps us to navigate these complexities and rethink how education can truly serve justice. Thank you all so much for listening to our presentation. We truly hope that this has helped you understand critical theory more.